of, of Gaza, unfortunately. Well, they invaded Israel and they killed uh, hundreds and hundreds of people. I think it was 1,000 something. It was the largest. It was the largest death toll in Jewish history since the Holocaust, I think. So, and many were raped, kidnapped, etc. And so, when they did the investigation, they found that the people that were most likely responsible in the investigation was Iran, that Iran had planned it with Hamas. They had planned the attack, which was supposed to be much larger than it was, and that Hamas had been meeting with Russia. So the axis of evil that led to the October attacks was Russia and Iran. So the conversation came up, what do you do after the fact? And what you do after the fact was something that we called the 6 phases. And the 6 phases was um, an attempt to try and see what we could do to make sure that it never happened again, but also to make sure that um, the main thing was to reduce the number of deaths. How so? Say you are sitting with a bunch of computers, artificial intelligence, and you're with a group of researchers, anthropologists, and you get together and you do war games and you look and you break down what were the problems that happened on October 7th, what were the security issues, how did we screw up? And then you use the computer to coalesce data to make it go faster. This is one of the great ways we can use AI. And what you do is you go through a series of war games. Could we do a deal? Could we do a deal with Putin? Could we do a deal with Iran? Could we renegotiate? Could we have another Iran agreement? Could we include them in the peace accords in the future in order to get to peace? Pay them not to kill us, basically. And the conclusion of those war games was the 5 phases. And we've talked a lot about those phases. We've talked a lot about this, and we've talked a lot about what it meant for the region. And we've talked a lot about whether or, how would the IDF, would other researchers come up with a different conclusion than my team came up with, because this was what we came up with. Working with computers over a 48-hour period based on what we understand happened on October 7th. And the conclusion was that we can never have a deal with Putin because Putin organized a pogrom against Israel on his birthday with Hamas that was where people were raped and tortured, just like the pogroms of Eastern Europe, where the czars, Cossacks, would go in and randomly attack villages that he was mad at, whether it was Jews or non-Jews. This is what the Cossacks would do. They would get drunk and attack any village. If a village was harboring a Bolshevik, for example, right? You'd go in and you would just kill everybody in the village, right? So the conclusion, again, if you're looking at what happened, is that you can't have a deal with somebody like Putin because what he did was so psychotic. Invading a sovereign nation like Ukraine was so psychotic. So we went through this how many times? I was screaming at people. One person that helped me with this project never wants to speak to me again. I mean, this was a really tough. To come to these conclusions was very painful. People were crying, people were having breakdowns, but this was the conclusion. And because I'm such a I don't know what, I sent it to Israel. I sent it to the State Department. I CC'd the State Department. I didn't want the IDF to think I was off doing whatever. So, and then yeah, and to Biden, CC'd Biden, the State Department, the IDF. This is a copy that I gave to Benny Gantz. And the only reason I feel comfortable releasing it is because Benny Gantz said that he publicly said he strongly supported it, that he strongly supported the 3 phases of Joe Biden. So Joe Biden was taking the Israeli idea, because when I asked Israel, challenge this data, am I wrong? I want you to prove me wrong. They came to the same conclusion. Number 1, ceasefire. Number 2, exchange of hostages, offer Hamas an out to a host country, and then start the rebuild. So, so there was a universal agreement. But then we get into the dangerous areas, the stuff we don't want to talk about, which is what do we do with those people that were responsible for the massacre? And the inevitable conclusion of the data is that Putin must be contained. And that based on the data analysis of the computer and the team of people that I worked with some really damn smart people. I had a lot of people go over this. You can't do a deal with someone like Putin. Yeah. So the other conclusion is that Russia would fall before Iran. And the reason that the computer concluded that Russia would fall before Iran was because it was less economically stable. Now, you could argue that what the computer is attempting to do is to break down BRICS. And, what is BRICS? Well, BRICS is a trade agreement that's taking place between Russia, Iran, China, right? I think Brazil is also part of that, right? The B is for Brazil. South Africa is the S. All right, so it's Brazil, Russia, Iran, China, and South Africa. So they have this trade agreement going on. Are we trying to crush BRICS? I don't know. But this is the conclusion. So Russia will fall first because of economic instability. Putin will be increasingly isolated if the intelligence teams follow the data. How did we come to this? I remote viewed. I work in a trance state. I am a trained remote viewer, and I am hired to remote view and profile. And I work for free if I send things to the government. I do not charge for this. And then it is up to those governments to challenge me. And it would appear so far that they have agreed with the data. So the only reason I'm sharing it now, I waited about a year before I started showing it to people, is because I wasn't quite sure that they were going to come to the same conclusion. But then when I heard that Biden had released the 3 phases, I knew that, okay, we're moving in the same direction here. So that would conclude, then we can conclude from this that Putin they are actively working to isolate and contain Putin. We can't have someone like this. Again, the computer was asked to calculate our risk of a nuclear war that was going to kill us all as long as this wingnut's in there. He has to be removed. You cannot negotiate with a madman. That is the conclusion of the report. Then moving on to the dismantling of Iranian leadership. So the dismantling of Iranian leadership was the next phase. This is not something that anybody enjoys. This is painful. This hurts. But when you look at, again, who was responsible for this insanity, it's Iran, Hamas, and Russia. So Iran, Russia, Hamas have to fall. And what I want to say also here in terms of the remotes, and why is this so painful? You go on to dismantling Putin, and dismantling Iran means you have to dismantle their allies. So how do you isolate Iran? You isolate Iran by dismantling the proxy armies and the things that prop up Iran. So you might see, if you were, if we suspected that the Israeli Defense Forces and the United States computers were coming to a different conclusion than what my team and I went through with our war games, then you would expect them to begin dismantling any proxy armies or allies that are propping up Iran. So you might, for example, see the fall of Hezbollah, the fall of Hamas, and the fall of Syria. And that's precisely what we have seen. So again, it just goes back to everybody, asking the right question. And for me, the question was, how do we keep the most people alive? And just being brave enough to ask that question, and then have a team of people you trust to go through those questions and scenarios, break it down, get that to a simple 5-phase data, and then get it to the people that need to see it, and then have them challenge it. And it would appear that we've all come to the same conclusion. So it goes back also to the death of Raisi, when we had talked about the fact that the death of the president of Iran was inevitable. And then we saw the crash close to a year later, and the belief that the pilots and the people on board may have been poisoned. And so it was actually a poisoning that caused the crash rather than a malfunction of the helicopter itself. So, are we looking at a soft coup? So they bring in a moderate, quote unquote, liberal to knew the people would vote for as the replacement. And then now they have a moderate who wants to work with the West as their president. And then if you get rid of the religious extremist Khamenei, you could replace them with the military and possibly the prince, the Shah's son, which is what we're probably looking at. And that's because the IRGC, the Iranian Guard, is split. Some of the Iranian Guard supports the West and some does not. But if you're looking at the assassination, we were pretty sure that Hanani, is that what his name was, who was killed, was assassinated by the IRGC, the Iranian Guard in Iran, because pro-Israeli, right? Because you have this split between pro-Western, pro-American, pro-Israeli in the IRGC and those that are anti. And it was, in fact, the Iranian Guard that assassinated him. I thought he was going to be assassinated the first time that he was in Iran. I felt like the Shah had given him the kiss of death. And then it didn't happen, which left me confused, because as a remote viewer, it looked very much like he was on thin ice. And then it came out that they had called off the assassination and had killed him the second time. I guess it didn't work out. He'll be back. And then they assassinated him the second time by planting a bomb in the villa where he was staying, the IRGC villa where he was staying.